stream audience. Thank you, Amy Hungerford, for leading this masterclass today. Take it away.
Thank you, Sam, and thank you, Renee, and I'm really happy to be here. Rachel, thank you for all your ministrations to the technology, and moreover, thank you to each and every one of your Zoom box selves. You, I know, are doing yeoman's work these days. I can't imagine what it's like to teach really younger students than the ones that I teach over Zoom. I teach college students over Zoom this term. So I just want to salute you as we begin. But let's talk about Fleabag, because that's the really juicy stuff. Let me tell you first how I came to be interested in Fleabag. I'm interested as a scholar in the question of what solitude is and what we think solitude is. And I was interested in this long before the quarantine. I have proof of this, that this was not a quarantine only inspired research project. So I've been thinking about solitude, and I've been thinking particularly about whether solitude is really what we think it is as modern people. And my contention is that solitude is basically a sociable state, as distinct from something like isolation or loneliness or solitary, in the sense of solitary confinement in our system of incarceration. So I think that's an unfortunate use of the word solitary, although there's a long history to that. But I think solitude as a state of fullness is pretty much always sociable in one way or another. And the range of ways might include states of prayer or imagination or memory or reading in particular. I'm interested in reading as a way that human presence is with us in a mediated form, but in a state of necessary solitude, at least of mental solitude. Emerson writes in the essay Nature, he says, if man would be alone, he needs to withdraw from his chamber as much as from other human beings. And if he would be alone, let him look at the stars. So for Emerson, true loneliness is being alone in the face of the vast, inhuman universe. And he makes clear that in your chamber reading, where we all are quarantined, in your chamber, that is a sociable place. So I've been interested in these features of solitude, and you can probably guess that those questions are motivated very much by a sense of what social network technology has done for individuals, human beings in the 21st century. So when we think about what it means to be in the company of other people through this sort of medium, I think we need to understand more thoroughly the history of forms of mediated company in order to kind of wrap our minds around what being in company this way means to people and what it does to people, and how we can either thrive or suffer in these spaces. So I've been thinking about things along those lines, and I'm going to now share with you a PowerPoint that will take us through, or give us occasion to walk through some questions about Fleabag. Now, I will say I don't have clips. It's extremely hard to produce clips. Probably Jacob knows how to do this, but I'm not very good at this. It is not my bread and butter. I kept running into the copyright protection that would black out the screen when I tried to even to take stills, but I found a way to take stills, and that's what I'll be using to talk through my way of understanding what's going on in Fleabag. So just before we start, can you raise your little blue hand if you have seen um, both the television series and the one woman show? Can you raise your little blue hand or your human hand, I suppose, but we can practice the raise hand function. Can everybody find that under participants as Rachel? So can you raise your hand if you saw both? So, okay, so that's almost no one. Is that really true?
It looks
Okay.
like about half of us have our hands raised.
I am not seeing them. Oh, no, I see them. Okay, so when I teach, I usually see the hand raises over the pictures, but I can see them in the, okay, very good. All right, so it's most of you. Thank you. All right, so I'm going to share the screen now, and I'm mainly going to be talking about the television program, but I'm delighted to know that most of you have seen both, so that the lack of clips won't be too painful. Okay, so I'm going to share this, these slides with you. All right, so so this is Fleabag, the inside story. I want to begin with this wonderful quote from Epictetus, just to round out the point I've been making about the history of solitude. He says, "As bad tragic actors cannot sing alone, but in company with many, so some persons cannot walk about alone. Man, if you are anything, both walk alone and talk to yourself, and do not hide yourself in the chorus. Examine a little at last, look around, stir yourself up, that you may know who you are." Um, I love what he says here about solitude being an occasion to talk to yourself. So this is, ancient philosophy, and already the human experience has this strange feature that that man can sort of imagine that he is double and can start conversations within. The next quote I wanted to share with you is a little bit darker, and I think also relevant to Fleabag. Octavio Paz is writing about Mexican youth culture in the mid 20th century in a book called Labyrinth of Solitude. And he writes, "In an epoch of group work, group songs, group pleasures, man is more alone than ever. Modern man never surrenders himself to what he is doing. A part of him, the profoundest part, always remains detached and alert. Man spies on himself." So I think you can immediately see how this applies to Fleabag. There's this modern double consciousness, something that W.E.B. Du Bois has written about in relation to race, the sense of understanding yourself both as you inhabit your own embodiment, but also always aware of how you're being perceived by others in a racialized system. Then there's this version, which is about self-consciousness. And of course, many forms of art have been breaking down the fourth wall, as we call it, for over, well, probably centuries, depending on how you read your drama, but certainly for the last 100 years or so. So that fourth wall is what Phoebe Waller-Bridge is playing with in Fleabag. And of course, we can begin just with the simple ways that she's playing with the fourth wall. This is a scene from a shopping trip that Fleabag takes with her priest friend. Andrew Scott is the actor. He's popularly known as the hot priest. I'll just call him the priest. So there she is, turning back towards us to comment on his neck as they're walking down the street. So as you know from watching the show, this is just a regular feature. And what's so remarkable about the acting is that these moments of breaking the fourth wall occur seamlessly in an ensemble acting situation where every other character pretends that they don't see this, and there's no time lost in the scene to allow for these asides. They just flow in an organic way, giving us the sense that, as Paz says, man spies on himself, that she's always spying on herself through the eyes of the camera. And when Waller-Bridge talks about a Fleabag as a creation, she has talked about the fact that the one woman show came first, and actually I want to talk about that sort of a little bit later. But the one woman show and her development of this character came first. Then she did a first season, and she thought that she was finished by the time that Fleabag, at the end of that first season, makes her big confession. Just in case anyone hasn't watched both seasons, I don't want to reveal what that big confession is at the end of season one. But Waller-Bridge thought that she was finished with this character. And then she began to think about the premise of the show and to wonder what would happen if she inserted a character who could perceive Fleabag's asides to the camera. And so she came up with the idea of the priest, and that launched the whole second series. So the second season really is the exploration of what it means to be intimate with someone, and to have your inner dialogue somehow overheard by someone in real life. This raises so many fascinating questions for literary scholars, for anyone interested in an aesthetic form. First of all, what are we if we are not other people that she's having a relationship with? What's the camera? She has said that the camera is something that she feels she needs to confess to. We'll talk more about that. But the premise may mean that we are in her head somehow. We are not actually embodied human beings to her mind. So instead, we have Andrew Scott there. Here they are. She's speaking aside to us, and here's his. I love looking at his face as he acts out the perception. What was that? He says, "Where do you go? Where'd you just go?" And of course she says, what do you mean? The dynamics of this and the precision with which it's played is quite remarkable. So going back to this sort of garden variety instance, her eyes, where her eyes are looking, makes an important difference. So here she's looking back at us. This is in the same scene now. They're talking about death, actually. No, they were already gone. And she says, his beautiful neck. And you see that her eyes, she has forgotten to look at us in this scene as she's continuing to comment on the beauty of his body. And he hears her, in this case, literally. What? You just said his beautiful neck. So when she looks at him by mistake, instead of at us, she actually does communicate with him by accident. So this is very, very precise acting and writing in these scenes. It's really quite remarkable. And then she denies it. And what I love is the way that the ostensible topic of the conversation about looking at someone who is dying and that they're somehow already gone. There's a way in which her extreme presence sits in tension with that, or makes the power of human absence even more poignant, because actually she has been unwittingly more present than she intended to be, more present to him than she intended to be. And he has actually heard her inner dialogue. And of course, this is his way of dealing with it. Okay, weird. So one question I wanted to ask about Fleabag, as I perceived that this show was absolutely fascinated with inner life, um, and with the sociability of solitude, I wondered why it was important that the character she falls in love with is a priest, and why it's the priest who can perceive inner life. So you can see just in this poster for season 2 that she's playing around um, with religious iconography. And when we get back together, I'll show you the bound book of the screenplay, and you'll see how she's extending that metaphor even to the print form. So why a priest? And I guess my conclusion has been that the priest is a kind of expert in the inner life, and he's in particular an expert in the sociability of religious life, as a form of inner life. And this is revealed in a number of ways. One of my favorite is this scene. This is fairly early in their relationship, and uh, she says, well, I'm a normal person, and he asks her, what makes you a normal person? She says, well, I don't believe in God. And if you look in the background over here, the picture is sliding down off the wall. So the picture falls down off the wall, if you remember this scene, and the priest says, oh, I love it when he does that, as if God were listening to them. So that's one way that the show makes God into an actual social being who here is eavesdropping externally, um, like as if God were a character overhearing them, or part of us, the audience, overhearing them. I urge you, if you have the time, to look up the GQ little short film where Andrew Scott watches the scene in the confessional and sort of commentates on it. It's really fabulous. This is from that famous scene where she comes into the church at night and finds him there playing really loud rap music. She goes to find him in his office. He's very surprised to see her there. Um, he says, oh, I thought you were in my head just then. Um, this is a great scene where the self-consciousness about what's internal and external is just written right into the naturalistic dialogue. So he's obviously thinking about her. He's jumping up and down, trying to reach the bottle of whiskey that he's hidden up on the shelf. And so he's thinking about her, and then she appears. So this is a case in which what's inside his head suddenly appears outside. The sociability of his internal life becomes externalized, just as God, his sort of internal spiritual life, becomes externalized when the picture falls down the wall. He's continually trying to figure out what is inside him and what is outside him. This is one of the scenes in the brief period where the couple, they've already slept together at this point. They're deeply in love. He's about to conduct the wedding for stepmother and her father, or godmother, sorry, and Fleabag's father. And they're sort of around the corner in the garden kissing. And he says, oh, I don't know what this feeling is. And Fleabag says, is it God or is it me? And he says, I don't know. He's supposed to be the expert on the inner life, but this intimacy makes it difficult for him to tell who is inside and who is outside. This is back from that scene of where he sees her suddenly coming as if from out of his head that evening in the church. And here she is saying that her own inner life has been awoken by intimacy with him. She says he demands to know why she came into the church. And she says, I was on the verge of having a little prayer, actually. So prayer life then becomes part of her life. And it's interesting to me here that we get a face-on shot. So she's looking at us and at the priest at the same time, as if somehow the camera and the priest align in this scene, just in this moment. Now that gets much more, that sort of camera work gets much more complicated and interesting as she moves from this space that you see her in into the confessional, where he tries to contain her confession in that sort of traditional context of the church that the church provides. Spectacular scene. It's another occasion where a picture falls off the wall to stop them from basically from consummating their love right there in the church. And God's kind of appearance as a character becomes palpable. So just in closing, there's so much more to say about this show, and we can get at some of that in Q&A. But when you think about what is Fleabag about, here I invoke the famous toilet monologue where she says, I just can't stop thinking about sex. She says the performance of it, the awkwardness of it, the moment when someone says, when someone wants your body. So it is so much a show about the body and about sexuality. But what I found fascinating is how it manages to be both that and this very sophisticated aesthetic meditation on inner life. That's why I think it's a show worth watching more than once, and it will be part of whatever book I write about solitude. So I'm going to stop the screen share. We can go back to any of these images if you like. And now let me show you. Here's Fleabag, the scriptures. And what I also like about this is, Waller-Bridge is English, of course. This book, when you pick it up, it feels just like the 1982 Episcopal hymnal. It actually feels like a religious book. So it's just that, it's just the screenplays. And I haven't yet dug into it. It came out last fall, and then I got too busy to read it. But she's clearly thinking about the physicality of religious life, and it goes right down to the object of the book. So I'll stop there. I would love to hear your thoughts, reactions, questions, what you noticed about the show, and any other aspects of the reading that you want to pull out.
Thank you so much. So let's open the floor for questions. And if you'll just please use the raise your hand function, we'll call on you as they come up.
I'll jump in. Amy, you were going to talk about the one-woman show and how that differed, and how do you see that? Because she doesn't have the, I don't know, the asides are not as easy to do in a one-woman show as they are in a film.
Yeah, so I see the one-woman show as the sort of the inversion of the TV show. So if you imagine the one-woman show, it's it's the character, live audience, so an embodied audience, and what you see of the other characters in her stories are her memories. So she's showing us she's telling us, evoking what's in her imagination and memory as she evokes the other characters. In the TV show, it sort of turns inside out. Her memory, what is memory in the one-woman show, becomes actual other human beings acting in the ensemble in the television show, and what's external very much in the one-woman show, you, the audience embodied sitting there, becomes internalized in the TV show because you're just this camera, and it's clear you're not embodied. You're really not quite a person that she's speaking to. So I love that she kind of just took the one woman show and turned it inside out, or turned the mind inside out, to make flesh what is in the mind. And that making flesh, to me, also, you can run a reading that goes right back into the Catholic iconography of the second season. Carol, you have your hand up.
It was interesting hearing that, because you saying that it's like her internal monologue almost when she's talking, because there's a scene that I remember. I always thought that, like, when she turns to the camera to talk, she's actually talking to us, like, as an the audience that would have been in the play. Because I remember when she was with the therapist, and the therapist asked, "Do you have friends?" And she turns to us and she's like, "Oh, I have friends." And I always thought that, like, we were her friends, like that somehow she was really bringing the audience in to be like, this is a live show, almost like, you are my friends. And then, when she actually said that, I was like kind of shocked, because I was like, oh, she's like talking about us to her therapist.
Yeah, I think you could certainly mount a reading that went on the premise that she thought of the camera as an embodied set of friends, all of us watching her. I sort of feel like the ending of the second season would argue against that, because she tells us to go away. She gestures us to leave her at the end. As if the sort of burden of our presence is something she needs to abandon. So that would suggest, if there's a consistent understanding of who this audience is throughout, might suggest that we're not really her friends. We're more like a surveillance, or that sort of divided self that Michel Foucault talks about in the kind of history of Protestantism, self-regulation, the sort of guilt that you're made to, that you're asked to have about your own behavior, and the sort of self-surveillance. So I think you could argue different ways, but in that particular moment, you could also say it's just the sociability of solitude. That just is what solitude is, feeling that you have a sociable presence with you. So,
Rebecca, do you want to jump in? Oh,
sorry.
Hi. Thank you
Hi,
so
Rebecca.
much. Hi. I was really interested in the fact that, I watched the 2 seasons and then I watched the live season. So there's a substitution of Jo for Kristin Scott Thomas, the businesswoman of the year. And I really loved that scene in that season where, again, she sort of comes on to, Kristin Scott Thomas, and like, is so hungry for someone to touch her and love her and make her feel alive in some way. So I really liked that. And I thought that worked really well. So when it was surprising when I came back and it happened with Jo, which I thought was actually even more dramatic, really, the fact this old man who plays the ukulele, but they have the same speech about people. But with Kristin Scott Thomas, for me, it was more powerful, because she was speaking as a menopausal woman, and she rejects her, but gently. But then it's like, it's people like, go out there and flirt. Like, it's so, I thought that was even more sort of life affirming in that way. I just wondered what you thought about that substitution.
Yeah, no, I think in general, the TV show is more life affirming than the one woman show. And I think that's a perfect example of it. It's just, we were talking about it in our breakout group at the beginning. There's a lot, I don't know if it was you saying this, Amy, but there's a lot to look at. there are these other
Yeah.
characters. The acting is really spectacular all around, and it's funnier somehow having the other actors in the ensemble. It's just funnier. And I think it was Jacob was saying in our group that she's talked about getting very deep into the psyche in the one woman show, into a darker place, and I think you can feel that. You can definitely feel that. Yeah.
Sarah, oh, sorry, Sarah Phipps, you want to jump in?
Amy, I was so happy to see all those scenes because I just rewatched season 2 today. And the first time I watched it, I just sort of went in, and this time I watched it more critically. The thing I was amazingly struck by was how many ways you can interpret that sort of that person she talks to, because one way you can look at it, not literally, but kind of symbolically, is that it's her dead friend, or it's her dead mother, or it's like that dream confidant that we all wish kept us company through our lives, God. And you can look at it one way, that when she sort of says goodbye to it, it's saying goodbye to whatever the ghosts are that she's haunted by. And that she's going to sort of kind of be in the moment and communicate. But I just was, and also we should talk about the fox at some point too, because that's pretty important. But yeah, the thing I loved about it is it's like impossible to completely pin down, but it gets to like so much kind of the essence of being alive and the feeling of profound loneliness, but also this sort of like way that you kind of like a higher consciousness. So that's what I've been thinking about.
Yeah, I want to hear what you think about the fox, because I don't know I don't have a reading of the fox. I would like one.
Well, I can tell you just a couple things that I noticed today. The first thing is that she looks exactly like Fox, like the pointy face. There's something about her physicality that definitely seems very Fox-like. And I mean, the idea that he sort of felt hunted is fascinating to me. And it almost seems like that's like she has her ghosts and demons and whatever. That's his ghost, his demon. I don't know. Is the fox like sexual love? I don't know. But it definitely, at one point I felt like it was like the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. I don't know, but it seemed very important and very resonant. And it's, of course, because it comes in at the end, like the fox is there chasing him.
Good enough. I'm happy with that. Let's hop over to Sarah Kate.
Oh, well, my question was about the fox too. My friend suggested to me, when I told her I didn't really know what it meant, that it was his animal nature chasing him down.
Oh.
Making him suspicious that the life of the priesthood wasn't gonna be able to give him total peace, because there's this part of himself that craves that it is his sexuality that she's awakening in him that won't let him alone any more than her nagging desire to really connect with somebody, but also her fear that eventually she will leave her alone. So I'm glad we're on the fox now. That was good. What do you think about the fox?
Yeah, no, I like both these readings are good. I feel like I'm pretty compelled by the idea of his animal nature, because of course we know about him that he was kind of a Fleabag person himself. He was promiscuous and led by his embodiment in his actions. So yeah, I like that sense of him being hunted by his own animal nature. Yeah, that's great. Mary.
Well, I keep going back to the confessional, to my Catholic upbringing. And, actually, I got in trouble for being in church once. The boys were chasing us and we hid in the confessional, and then we got in trouble for it. There's something very sexual about it. I don't know why, and maybe it shouldn't be, but she wants to confess something. Like, that's something that's kind of going on in her inner dialogue. We know that she feels she's sinned, right? So she meets the priest, but she's attracted to his sexuality. Like, he's out there with that. But then he says, "Oh, come into the confessional and, tell me your sins." She's not a Catholic, but they're using the old confessional, which wouldn't really even be in use today. It's no longer like that. Like you say confession 1-to-1. And then when, it kind of gets carried away, and then he's like, "Get on your knees." And then he's standing before her, and it's like, oh my God. And then later she talks about how, sex is this running piece. And that's what she has to confess, right? She has to confess her sexual act. That's like the whole piece. So it's kind of tied together. I don't know if I have a question, but I'm just like, why that whole piece that kind of shows up there. And I think if you're a Catholic and maybe another religious type, that piece is always there with you, as if you have something that you have to confess, like, or that you've done something wrong, or to be better. Like, who is the priest the audience? And the fact that he's not perfect makes him a better priest to me, in a way. I don't know. But those are some observations that came up for me.
Yeah, no, obviously that's such a crucial scene for so many reasons, and it's brilliant because it's both thematically appropriate and it flows perfectly naturally in the scene, but formally and in a medium sense, it resonates formally because the way it's shot, you can't see her interlocutor, just as you can't see us from her point of view through the camera. So there's a kind of doubling of the surveillance. We're watching her, he's watching her. Both of us are hidden, both audiences are hidden. So there's that piece of it. And then, reality TV is unquestionably a feature of the genre that she's working with here, the contemporary genre. And so she's taken what has been made banal and secular, the confession booth. If you think of The Office or any of these reality TV shows, the confession booth has become a kind of mainstay. She puts it back in the actual confession booth, using many of those same techniques, but brings it to this real place of reflection on what it means to be intimate with someone, and where guilt might live in our treatment of each other. So I think all of those things are at play in that totally spectacular scene. Marissa.
I was wondering what everyone thought of, why a priest as the fixation in the second season. And I hadn't watched it, I kind of rewatched. And this time when I watched the episode in which she says, "I love you," I guess it's the end, I was so deeply suspicious. That love, no, you don't love him. I just want to know other people's take on it.
Well, that's great. About why the priest, I think that's what really was pointing me towards the inner life, that the priest, oh, sorry, Renee, we have to go back to small groups, but let me just say, the priest is the expert in the inner life. And I think that's why she chooses a priest. Also, like, he's unavailable and it creates all this tension, and that's really useful. But yeah, I love your suspicion. Well, maybe that's a good question for our small groups. Does she really love him or not? That seems like an interesting question we could take up.
Fantastic. Well, I'm so sorry we can't get to everyone's questions, but it is time to go back into small groups. In just a moment, we'll be sending you back into small groups. But before we do, we would like to, at the Academy for Teachers, we'd like to thank all of those who joined us by live